Learning how to fly, it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun. Learning to become a private pilot, a competent pilot in command, now that's what flying is all about. You've got a lot to learn in this new and exciting endeavor. You'll find it much of a mental exercise as you learn step by step. Hello, I'm Harold Holmes, President of Video Training Aids. I'd like to welcome you to our new Private Pilot Ground School course. We have some experts hard at work to help you build a foundation of knowledge that will enable you to more than just pass the private pilot written examination. Al Engelhardt has been teaching his well-known weekend private pilot ground school for more than 12 years. He has successfully trained over 7,500 ground school students. He's been a pilot for United Airlines since 1969 and has flown over 6,000 hours. Al Engelhardt pioneered the concept of a complete ground school in 18 hours of classroom instruction. I've worked with him to bring you what we feel is the very best private pilot ground school video course that's available. As a designated flight test examiner and flight instructor, I've licensed over 4,000 pilots, beginning my flying career as a naval aviator in 1943. Together, Al Engelhardt and I have probably answered just about every question a student might have. So without any further delay, let's get down to work. Good luck, and thanks for choosing Video Training Aids.
Let's then get moving along with the course here. And what I'd like to do is I would like you to get out your sectional chart, your cyan sectional chart. And I'd like to talk about the sectional chart, point out a few things. First of all, this is the Cheyenne sectional chart. You can see the area that this covers, shows Cheyenne here. And each one of these charts is named after the largest city within each area. Of course, this is the Cheyenne area. The one adjacent to that to the east is the Omaha area, and you can see the Chicago area. Now, I'd like to tell you that the important thing to know is that there's another kind of a chart. And the other kind of a chart is called a WAC chart, a World Aeronautical Chart. Now, a World Aeronautical Chart is a different scale. This is scale 1 to 1,000,000. And it's important when you pick up the chart that you realize which chart you have. The World Aeronautical Chart is much less detailed. This is more for experienced professional pilots or for very experienced amateur pilots. It's less detailed. It's hard to fly by landmarks using this one. The sectional chart, on the other hand, is more for student pilots and private pilots. So this one is more detailed. Now, this is scale 1 to 500,000. The WAC chart was scale 1 to 1,000,000. So you can see this is twice as detailed, as a matter of fact. Well, that brings us to an important point on the FAA test. You're going to have to measure distances. And when you measure distances, you all have a plotter. Let's get out our plotters for just a minute. We'll get ahead a bit in the course here, and we'll talk a little bit about measuring distances. So I'd like you to get out the plotter, and I'd like you to locate the scale that says on its sectional scale. There's two scales. One of these is the sectional scale, and one of these is the WAC scale. Now, you can tell the sectional scale because it says on it 1 to 500,000 sectional scale. You can tell the WAC scale. Now, if you want to measure distances, all you have to do is take the plotter, put it on the map between the 2 points you want to measure, and you can see how many miles it is. In this case, I've just measured a distance of 50 statute miles. Now, if I were to use the WAC scale, I would come up with an answer of 100. Now, I'd like to tell you that when you take your FAA test and you measure distances, the FAA knows about people that use the wrong scale, and they have answers for them. So I want you to be double careful. Just because you see the correct answer in a multiple choice question, that doesn't mean it's right off. The FAA knows about all the mistakes that you might make. They're familiar with those. So what I would like for you to do is to double check and be sure you have the proper scale. Now, I'd like you to notice that it also has another scale that parallels that says on it nautical miles. You can see here that 50 statute miles is equal to about 43 nautical miles. Now, what is a nautical mile? Well, a nautical mile is a little longer than a statute mile. In fact, a nautical mile is 15% longer. So since it's longer, there are fewer nautical miles in the same number of statute miles. When we drive down the road and you see a sign, and the sign gives you the distance to a city and says that that city is 150 miles on an automobile, those are 150 statute miles. But in aviation, the official scale of miles is nautical. That's the official scale. However, since a lot of us are private pilots and we drive cars and things, a lot of the airspeed indicators, particularly the older airspeed indicators, are still in miles per hour. So oftentimes it's necessary to convert nautical miles to statute and statute to nautical. And it's particularly important on this FAA test. So what I'd like to cover here, I'd like to jump ahead again in the course. I know we don't cover computers until the end of today's session, but what I'd like for you to do is get out your computer for a minute, and I'm going to show you how to make the simplest conversion on the computer. This is the simplest conversion. If you get out your computer and you look in the upper left-hand corner of the computer, you'll see an arrow that says nautical and another arrow that says statute. All right? Now, what I'd like for you to do is I'd like you to notice the problem says we have 150 statute miles. We want to know how many nautical miles that's equal to. Well, I want you to take the 15 that represents 150 statute, and I want you to put that opposite the statute arrow. Now then, I want you to look under the nautical arrow, and you'll see that's pointing to a 13. Of course, what that means is that 15 statute equals 13 nautical. And of course, it also would mean then 150 statute must equal 130 nautical. Now we make the conversion in the opposite direction also. For instance, you put the 13 opposite nautical, or whatever your nautical amount is, under the nautical arrow, and you can read the equal amount under the statute arrow. This is the simplest conversion on the computer. Now I'd like to tell you that they sell electronic calculators for less than $10 at the dime store. Many places. I want you to put this in your notes, that the conversion factor is 1.15. Now you don't need to know this for the FAA test, but it's helpful to you sometimes to make a conversion while you're having lunch at a restaurant. You want to know what the conversion is. All you have to know is 1.15. And that means that, for instance, if we have 150 statute miles, all we have to do is divide that by 1.15, and that'll give us 130. Or, of course, we could take 130, multiply that by 1.15, and that would give us the statute equivalent. So remember that conversion factor. Okay, now one thing I want to point out is this. Whenever they tell you something on this test, they tell you that a speed is in mph, miles per hour. That always means statute miles per hour. Okay? If they mean nautical miles per hour, they'll just use the word knots. So anytime you see mph, that means statute miles per hour. All right, let's try another problem now. We have a wind of 20 knots, and we want to know how many miles per hour that's equal to. Okay? All right, so I want you to take the known amount that we have, which is 20 knots, put that opposite the nautical arrow, then go over and look opposite the statute arrow, and that tells you the equivalent. And it says that 20 nautical miles equals 23, or 20 knots, which is 20 nautical miles per hour, equals 23 miles per hour. All right, so 20 nautical miles per hour called 20 knots equals 23 statute miles per hour. Again, this is the simplest conversion. And kind of our end of course objective here, let's do one more, and if you can do this one, then you've successfully know how to do this. And this will be on the test. We have an airspeed of 210 miles per hour, and we want to know how many knots this is equal to. All right. Try to set this up yourself. Okay, here we are. We have 21 now. 21 will be put opposite the statute. That represents 210 miles per hour. And we look opposite the nautical arrow and notice it doesn't fall right on the bold 180. It falls one notch beyond that. And you can see that each one of these notches must be 2, so that would be 182. That's equal to 182. All right, let's move on now. And I want to just mention to you that there are some fancy aviation electronic calculators. Some of these are designed specifically for these types of conversions. You can purchase these, and they are legal to use on the FAA test. With this type, all you have to do is just push one button, statute to nautical, and it makes a conversion for you. These are specifically designed for aviation. These are all right to use on a test. However, I don't cover these in the course because there's all kinds of assortments of these. All right. Now, on your sectional chart, I'd like you to move down to the bottom of that front legend page, and I'd like to point out to you a little bit about terrain. I'd like to point out that the terrain on a map goes from green to kind of a yellow to a light brown to a dark brown when you get up to high elevations. Just look at your legend page. That's all we want to deal with right now is the legend page. All right. Here is some high terrain. It goes from kind of a light brown to a dark brown. I'd like to point out this line that says on it 9,000. This line is called a contour line. They might ask you on a test, what is a contour line? And you can probably tell now that a contour line is a line that connects points of equal elevation. This makes this map three-dimensional. Everything in the brown area here is above 9,000 feet. Now here's another line, and this line says on it 8,000. There's no color change at this point, but this is still a contour line. Now the line that occurs between 8,000 and 9,000, that's the 8,500 foot level. It's not labeled, but we just have to interpolate and figure that must be 85. The contour lines occur on this map every 500 feet. You may have to check the legend and see how often these contour lines appear. Here's another slide I'd like you to look at. And notice that this shows some terrain that seems to be quite rapidly rising. All right, this is a very steep ridge that comes up to the top of a mountain. Look at the top of this mountain. The top of this mountain is 10,827 feet above sea level. Now right now, you've probably in your plane never flown above 10,000 feet. The reason you haven't flown above 10,000 feet is it takes so long, considering performance. Once you get above 5,000, the performance of the kind of planes you're flying, Cessna 152s and Cherokees and so on, the performance decreases so dramatically that after 5,000 feet, you climb just a few hundred feet per minute, and up near 9,000 feet, it barely climbs at all. So it's extremely important to you, if you're going to do some flight planning through the mountains, to consider how high the terrain is. You know, around here in the Midwest, whenever we want to go between 2 points, we just draw a straight line. But if you're flying west out of Denver, you don't just draw a straight line. You have to look at this map, and you have to make this map three-dimensional. You have to look and see, well, if I'm coming from this side here, and if I'm moving across, and if I want to pass through here, I may want to turn and follow along this Canadian River Valley here. And maybe you'll find a place down here to the south where you can cut through the mountain range without going above 10,000 feet possibly. So this is how we use these maps to make three dimensions. On this test, they're going to ask you a little bit about contour lines. They'll just ask you to look at this and tell how high the terrain is in this area. You can see how to do it. There's 9,000 foot terrain. There's 10,000 foot terrain. That must be 10,500, so on. I'd now like to point out to you these numbers. Don't bother looking for this on your legend. No, it's right there on that first legend page. These numbers are called MEFs. You will be asked about these on your FAA test. I'd like you to take a minute to turn to your yellow book that I gave you. In the very last page of your yellow book, it shows a legend on page 79. Now this is the exact legend you're going to have whenever you take your FAA test. You can see it tells right here what a maximum elevation figure is. So this test is sort of like an open book test, because they're going to ask you what these are. It tells you the answer right here. Take a look up here at a picture and I'll show you what these are. Here's this number, 47. And what this tells us is that within this box of latitude and longitude, this is a box, there's your latitude, and the vertical line's your longitude. Within this box of latitude and longitude, there is nothing that goes above 4,700 feet. These are sort of quick reference numbers. The following situation is going to come up in your flying. You're going to be trying to fly along maintaining visual, and you're going to be at sort of low. The clouds are going to get low, and you're flying along. You might be down to 800 feet for a little while, flying along, maintaining ground contact with maybe 3 miles visibility, maybe even 2 miles visibility for a little while. And what you're going to be concerned about is running into an obstruction. And these obstructions are kind of hard to see. These don't just stand out all the time. So what you're going to want to do is be able to look at the map, and for quick reference, we can see how high obstructions are. There's nothing above 4,700 feet. Here's an obstruction that's 4,567. That's why this number says 47 here. These are not minimum safe altitudes. These aren't safe altitudes. It's not safe to be over this obstacle 100 feet above it. These are just quick reference numbers so you can tell how high obstructions may be in this area. It tells us this right here, explains what it is. Now, keep in mind that these tell us the heights of not just terrain, but also it says that these consider trees, towers, antennas, etc. Okay? They'll ask you about that on the test. These are called maximum elevation figures. All right, I'd like you to turn your legend page now of your map. I'd like to talk to you about the legend and point out a few things. First of all, the legend says here that airports having control towers which is an airport traffic area, are shown in blue. All others are shown in magenta. I'll point some of those out to you in just a minute. I'd like to point out a couple other things. Notice that if an airport has hard surface runways, it shows the runway directions laid out right here. If they have a grass strip, it'll just show a sort of a circle like a donut with a hole in it. It doesn't show any runway directions. If an airport has facilities, legend says if they have services, fuel available and field tended during normal working hours, it has these little ears around it. Even though it may be a grass strip, here's an example of a grass strip that has facilities available. Here's an example of an airport with hard surface runway that has facilities available. The one in the middle there, that's not on the test, but that's a seaport. Actually, they do ask something about a seaport. I'll show you that later on. But this is a seaport with facilities available. That's for airplanes that are seaplanes. Lands with floats. Okay, for the test, they're going to ask you which airport have services available. You can tell that easily because it shows that it has ears around it. You'll also need to know which airports have control towers. And you can tell if it has a control tower because it's shown in blue. Let's take a look at some examples. I'd like you to look up here for a minute, class. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open the map so that we can look at Rapid City, South Dakota. If you have your map just like this, if you go to the very bottom panel and you start to pull out the bottom panel, a few panels off, you'll see Rapid City, South Dakota here. I'd like you to locate Rapid City, South Dakota. If you find it, you might help your neighbor. But if you find Cheyenne, you're on the wrong side of the map. I think you're on the wrong side of the map. Okay, there's Rapid City right there. Okay, you got it correct. It's over to the right side of the map. Over to the, not all the way to the right side, but sort of over to the right side. Here's what Rapid City looks like. Take a look up here. It has a giant magenta colored keyhole here. This is what Rapid City looks like. I'm going to come around and help a few people. Good. Let's see here. All right. Let's point out a few things on the map here. First thing I'd like to point out to you is, as I mentioned, airports that are shown in blue, like Rapid City, they have a control tower. We can also tell that because here it says CT 118.7. That's the control tower frequency, 118.7. And it tells the CT tells they have a control tower, and the fact that the airport's blue tells us they have a control tower. Now, I'd like to point out also that the airport has hard surface runways, and it has services available. That means the field is tended during normal working hours, like the legend says, and it probably has fuel. Here's another airport just off here to the west called the Lean Airport. This is actually a private airport, but this has a hard surface runway, but it has no services available, no fuel available. You might guess because it is a private airport, it says private there. Let's go off to the east along Interstate 90, and we come to another airport over here called the Wall Airport. Just to point out one out with a grass strip, the Wall Airport is a grass strip. You can see it has no runway directions shown. Also, you can see that it has fuel available and field tended during normal working hours. You can tell that because it has the ears around it. All right. Let's go back to Rapid City. Let's look at Rapid City for a minute, point out a couple other things. Oh, that little star up there, some people wonder what that star is. That star tells us that they have a rotating beacon at the airport to help you locate it at night. That's a green and a white rotating beacon. I'll show you a picture of one of those in just a minute. Now, I said that the airport has a control tower. This is a picture of a control tower. Now, I'd like to tell you that you're going to be asked a lot about control towers on the test, and one thing we have to know about is something called an airport traffic area. I'd like you to turn to page 22, figure 4 in your yellow supplemental data book. Okay, in this book, you can see here it shows a picture of an airport traffic area. Now, an airport traffic area, as you can see from this picture, is a 5-mile radius, and it goes up to 3,000 feet above the surface. These are the dimensions of an airport traffic area. They're going to ask you on a test, what is an airport traffic area? And all you have to do is have this picture in your mind. The one thing I want you to picture is the fact that there is a control tower there. and that it's an area of 5-mile radius and goes up to 3,000 feet above the surface. Now, since this is something that you need to know about not only for the test, but it's also something that you'll need to know whenever you take your FAA exam, I'd like you to get out this yellow sheet that I've provided. There's a sheet here called a fact sheet. Now, what these are sort of the party line. This is what you need to know whenever you take your FAA flight test. Your FAA examiner very often asks applicants about an airport traffic area. That's because many of them are confused about an airport traffic area, and particularly confused about airport traffic areas and control zones. So you notice I have these two facts listed here first. I want to talk about these. Let's read what it says about an airport traffic area. It says, an airport traffic area is the area around an airport with an operating control tower. It says it can be identified by the letter CT on the map. How else can we tell it on the map?
Color.
Color. It's blue. Sure. So that's a nice way to tell. All right. Now, it says the boundaries of this area are not shown on a map, but include a 5-mile radius, up to but not including 3,000 feet AGL. All right, I'd like you to underline that sentence. That's something many people don't understand. I want you to underline that sentence. The fact is that the boundaries are not shown on a map. A lot of people are confused. There are a lot of people that think this. Take a look up here. There are a lot of people that think that this is the boundary of the airport traffic. They think this blue dashed line is the boundary of the airport traffic area. Well, that's not correct. The boundaries are not even shown on a map. Now, as a matter of fact, this blue dashed line represents a control zone. Now, a control zone is usually 5-mile radius, but it has extensions out that are necessary to protect instrument traffic during instrument conditions. So, it happens that the airport traffic area and control zone boundaries coincide right here. But the airport traffic area's boundaries, what we're just reading about here, those boundaries cut right across here. It's not marked on the map, but that's where they are. So, some control zones are only 3-mile radius, in which case the airport traffic area would extend beyond the control zone boundaries. So you see, this is just simply coincidental that the boundaries even coincide for a little while here. But the boundaries of the airport traffic area are not shown on a map, and they include a 5-mile radius up to but not including 3,000 feet AGL. Okay, now, I haven't told you this yet, but I'm going to tell you that the elevation of Rapid City is 3202. All right, that's the elevation of Rapid City. I'm going to explain how to read that in just a little while. That's the elevation of the airport. Believe it or not, that's what the altimeters read on the student pilots and all the pilots that fly at this airport before they even take off. Their altimeters read 3202. And just so you understand, if you were taking off from the Midwest here, and if you flew out to Rapid City, and assuming that the pressure was approximately the same out there as it would be here, which it may very likely be, when you land at Rapid City, your altimeter would read 3202 whenever you land there. That's the height of this airport above sea level. So, I'd like to tell you that, let's just, for something to do here, why don't you write here that the base of this airport traffic area is 3202. All right, that's the height of that airport traffic area on the ground, 3202. Let's write that right in our book, right here. Let's write 3202. Okay, now I want you to become familiar with the abbreviations MSL and AGL. MSL means mean sea level. Now everybody just says MSL, but they ought to say above mean sea level, such as AMSL. They don't say that though, they just say MSL. So anyway, the elevation of this airport is 3202 MSL. Of course, the top of this airport traffic area then is 3,000 feet AGL, above ground level, but the top of it actually, MSL then, would be 6202. Now I want to tell you then, class, whenever you're on a cross-country flight and you want to fly over an airport with a control tower, as long as you fly above the airport, above 3,000 feet above the ground, you won't have to call anyone. Now there are some airports that are real busy ones, and they have a special kind of an area above it that requires you to call, but there aren't that many of those airports. This airport here, I can tell you, you can fly right over Rapid City as long as you're above 3,000 feet above the ground, and you don't need to call anyone. And if you're out flying around and you're doing slow flight and practicing, as long as you're more than 5 miles from this airport, you don't need to call anyone. But if you want to go in this airport traffic area, then you must call. You must use your radio. The idea is they want to hear from you. They assume you're landing at the airport. Or if you want to fly through there, you should call them. Now there are special exceptions about your radio, such as if your radio fails or something like that. And there's some other special exceptions. But generally, we have to have two-way radio. What else do we have here? It says, just as I mentioned here, it says, unless a pilot has radio failure, when operating within an airport traffic area, a pilot must maintain radio contact with the control tower. Okay. Now, I want to talk to you about this. I sort of skipped over this real quick. I want to skip over the fact that this airport has FSS, Flight Service Station. Since that right here, I should just mention to you what flight service is. This airport has a flight service station. Now here is a picture of a genuine flight service station person. Now he works for the FAA, all right? He's a genuine flight service station man. He works for the FAA. Now, I'd like you to know that at airports with flight service, what their job is they give you pilot briefings. Now, in the Chicago area, the flight service station is located at Kankakee. Raise your hands, class, if you fly out of Kankakee. Raise your hands if you don't fly out of Kankakee. Okay? None of us fly out of Kankakee, right? So what'd you say?
Yeah, well, I have flown.
You have flown there? Okay. But if you don't fly out of there, the only way you can get a weather briefing is to call up then, right? So one job of flight service is to provide you with weather briefings. And most times, you'll get your weather briefing by telephone. Now, some of the services the flight service provide are three things. Primarily, they provide us with weather briefings, right? Also, they provide us with flight plan information. We want to file a VFR flight plan, or later as you get your instrument rating, an instrument flight plan. They also can provide us with NOTAM information. NOTAM stands for Notices to Airmen. So they can provide us with NOTAM information also. So if we're about to take off on a cross country, it's always a good idea to call flight service and get your weather briefing. Also, you can file a flight plan with them if you choose to, and it's a good idea to query the controller about any NOTAMs. Sometimes they don't provide all the NOTAMs unless you ask them about them. We'll talk more about how to call for a proper briefing a little later. If you're flying along en route and you think the weather's changing, or you want to get some updated weather, you can reach Flight Service Station by radio also. How can we tell if an airport has flight service? Well, simple. It says FSS there. I'm going to tell you in just a little while, though, that because it's sort of difficult to see that saying FSS there, if you want to know what airport has flight service, it's hard to see those little letters. I want to tell you that anytime you see one of these heavy boxes like this, sort of a bold box like this really has to do with the navigational aid, but it also tells us, and I'll show you this in the legend, it tells us that there's a flight service station nearby. So whenever you see a heavy, bold box versus a thin one, you see a heavy, bold box like this, it means there's a flight service station at one of the airports nearby. You can look a little closer to see just which airport has flight service. Okay, now I want to talk about some of the other information here. We talked about the fact it has flight service and the control tower frequency and so on, but I want to cover this line that's called the aerodrome data. Looking at the legend, you might want to look at the legend now. You may care to look at page 79 in your supplemental data book. And it has a legend. I want to cover what this means on the aerodrome data line. So, first of all, on the aerodrome data line, it shows a 0.3. Now, I'm going to show you here that that's the elevation of the airport, 3 feet above sea level. Also, it has an L here having to do with the runway lighting. The runway lighting here operates from sunset to sunrise. That's what it says with the little L, sunset to sunrise. The length of the longest runway here is 9,200 feet. Shows 92. It says length of the longest runway in hundreds of feet, 9,200 feet. And the Unicom is 122.95. I'll talk more about what that Unicom is in just a minute. Let's take a look down here at Rapid City and let's read what this says exactly. I'll read it through quickly and then we'll also check the legend to see what it says. Rapid City, as I mentioned earlier, is an elevation of 3,202. 3,202 feet above sea level. This airport has lighted runways also. It has a little asterisk there, though. We'll check and see what that means in just a minute. And we can tell the length of the longest runway is 8,700 feet. And you can see that the Unicom frequency here is 122.95. All right, let's talk about this a minute. We can look at the legend, and you can see here that there it shows the elevation. Sample was 3 feet. Rapid City's 3,202. And then it had lighting. This is runway lighting, and there was a little asterisk by the one at Rapid City. Well, this airport has a control tower, and this little asterisk means that the lighting is either part-time or it's pilot-controlled lighting. You see, this airport is attended by the FAA. So, whenever there's nobody using the airport, they keep the lights off to save electricity. But if somebody calls in, the first thing they do, of course, is they turn the lights on. So the lights would normally be off there. Now you might, but let me tell you this. If we have another airport that has no control tower and no one really attending it, or maybe there's a Unicom person, but he goes home at 8 o'clock, he doesn't. So what they have there is they either have the lights on all night long, Or, to save energy, they have what's called pilot-controlled lights. Pilot-controlled lights are lights that are activated by clicking your microphone 3 times or more on a designated frequency. The frequency is usually the Unicom frequency. And that clicks the lights on for a period of time, usually say 15 minutes or so. Now, it's important to you if you're coming in to land at an airport that has pilot-controlled lights that you activate the lights even though they're already on. And the reason is because if they were already on and you didn't activate the lights, it might be just as you get to a critical phase of your flight, right as you're on final 200 feet up, all of a sudden all the lights go out, all right? Sometimes your passengers wonder, they say, you know, maybe they don't want us here or something, all right? You have to explain to them that they really want you there, but you just didn't turn the lights on, all right? So that's pilot-controlled lights. So basically, here's the way to think of it. If you see an asterisk at an airport that's uncontrolled, that probably, in other words, no control tower, that means you probably have to activate the lights by clicking your microphone. If it's at a tower airport like this, probably you activate the lights by the control tower whenever you call in. But in any case, let me tell you that you have to check. There's a publication we'll talk about later, an airport directory that tells us specifically how to activate the lights and what frequency. And some airports, if you click them 5 times, they come on a little brighter, and 7 times they come on real bright. So if you click them again, you can make them shut off even. So anyway, this is pilot-controlled lights. Now, the length of the longest runway here is 8,700 feet. Just add 2 zeros to that. All right? Now, the last number here, 122.95, that's the frequency of the Unicom. What is the Unicom? The Unicom is the fixed base operator. This is not an air traffic controller. In fact, they specifically ask you on your FAA test. Here's the question. The question says, this is important to know. The question says, what one service does Unicom not provide? And the answer to that is air traffic control. They do not provide air traffic control. What a Unicom person does is they provide you with information about fuel and so on. For instance, if you were coming in for a landing, you might want to call the Unicom person. Here's a Unicom person. I just was out on a trip and saw this person, took a picture of her. And her job is to see to it that you can get in, you can get fuel, and you can get out quickly. You may call in and say, I'm 30 miles out, and I'd like to let off one passenger, and he'll need transportation, a taxi cab, and when I get there, I'd like to get fuel. And the Unicom person will tell you over the radio, as soon as you land, pull up by the Phillips 66 sign, and we'll have the line crew out there waiting for you, and we'll have 100 octane available for you, and I want to know what credit card you're going to use. And see, I got a credit card machine right there. Take your credit card, and you'll be on your way, and call some transportation. But they do not provide any air traffic, right? Their job is not air traffic. Now, okay, well, keeping that in mind now, let's go up the road here. Let's go up the road, and we come to another airport up here called the Sturgis Airport. And let's see if we can read the information there. Okay, let's see. Maybe I could ask for a volunteer. Would you mind being a volunteer? Let's go up here to the Sturgis Airport, right up here, and see what you can tell me, everything you can about the Sturgis Airport.
It's 3,280 feet.
3,280 feet above sea level.
It's got lighting. It
has lighting. We can tell that because it has just a plain L there. Is that pilot-controlled lights, or would that be on all night, do you think?
It would be on all night.
Right, it would be on from sunset to sunrise.
Longest runway is 3,600 feet.
Longest runway is 3,600 feet, that's correct.
The Unicom is 122.8.
122.8 is the Unicom frequency, all right? All righty. Now, what else can you tell me about the airport as you look at it here?
It's hard surfaced, has facilities, and has an operating beacon.
Okay, it's hard surface, sure thing. It has facilities because it has the ears. That means that it probably has fuel available and has a rotating beacon there to help us locate the airport at night. Now, one thing important, class, you might say to me, well, you might say, Your Worthiness, I went to an airport like that not long ago, and we called in 15 miles south on the Unicom frequency 122.8, and they told us that the wind was out of the northwest and traffic was using runway 30. They told us there were 2 152s in the pattern, and that there was a Beechcraft Bonanza that was departing. So isn't that air traffic control? I want you to know that they provide you with advisories, but it's not air traffic control. And you have to keep in mind that the person you're talking to is not a trained air traffic controller. And they might be looking at devices that are not calibrated like the FAA's. Why, the FAA uses a device to give you an altimeter setting and wind direction that probably costs thousands of dollars. However, if a Unicom operator provides you with this information, they didn't pay thousands of dollars for the barometer they use to give you an altimeter setting so you can adjust your altimeter for landing. They probably purchased this at the dime store. all right? And it might have been on a blue light special, all right? And their readings are inaccurate. Now let me tell you, class, there could be nothing more serious I can think of than coming in at night to an airport with your altimeter setting in error, because you might be 200 feet lower than you think you are. And we use our altimeters a great deal at night when we're coming to the land because our depth perception is very poor, especially when you turn final. Your instructor will tell you to be sure you check your altimeter, to be sure you're maybe 400 feet in the air or something like that as you turn final, 300 or 400 feet in the air. And of course, if your altimeter's off, that could be serious. So I want you to remember that the information you get from the Unicom operator should be considered to be advisory only. And for the test, I want you to know that the information they give you is not air traffic control information. You see, sometimes I've been in situations like this where I was flying a high-performance airplane, like maybe a Cessna 340. Now, a Cessna 340 is a pressurized twin-engine Cessna and costs $200,000 or more. New ones cost even much more than that. Now, you might be coming into this airport, call in and say, I'm 15 miles south landing, and they'll tell you to use runway 21. And you look up here, and it doesn't appear to be any runway 21. You say, well, Roger, I understand runway 21. And they say, yes, sir, that's the sod runway. We're landing on the sod. And you might say, well, I'll be landing on the northwest runway, runway 30. Sometimes the Unicom people get overexcited about their new authority, and they tell you, no, you got to land on the sod. Everybody's using the sod today. You get my point? In other words, you should announce to traffic. We'll talk about this later. Announce to traffic. And Sturgis traffic, this is Twin Cessna 01 Quebec. We're on downwind for runway 30. Of course, other aircraft on that frequency will hear that and they'll watch out for you. But remember, Unicom does not provide air traffic control. That's the point I want you to know. Okay, we might read some additional information here. Let's go down the road here to another airport just to read about this one. And I might pick on another volunteer. But may I ask you to volunteer to talk about this one down the road here? There's another airport up here. This airport here is called the Black Hills Airport. Tell me everything you can about the Black Hills Airport.
Okay, Black Hills Airport is 3898 above sea level.
Okay, elevation 3898 above sea level.
It's got a runway length of 4,300 feet.
Okay, the first thing we ought to mention, though, is about the lighted runways there.
Lighted runway.
Okay, and what does that little star by it, the little asterisk by it mean?
It means that it does have lights.
It means it has pilot-controlled lights. In other words, don't be surprised if you come there at night and see all the lights are out. And we would probably turn the lights on by clicking the microphone 3 times on the Unicom frequency. That's probably how they would be activated. Okay, and as you said, the length of the longest runway is 4,300 feet. And what's that other number there?
122.8 is the Unicom.
122.8 is the Unicom frequency. That's exactly correct.
Hard surface runway.
Hard surface runway. They have a little, also they have fuel available there. Good. Now,
Fuel and services.
fuel and services available. A beacon to help you find the airport at night. By the way, this airport also has a glider club and has parachute jumping practice there. There are people that practice, that jump out airplanes for fun. Yeah, they do that. And the FAA makes them register, all right, just to kind of put a little advisory down. So it means when you come in here, you should watch out. Now, if you're on downwind leg and you look out and you see someone in a parachute, that parachutist, he has a right of way, all right? So watch out for him, all right? It also gives a little credibility, because sometimes passengers, they look up and they see somebody jumping out of an airplane up there, and they look, and they're scared. They think they're going to have to do that, see? Well, you can, assure them that they do that for fun, and if they don't believe that, then you can show them. It gives a little credibility to your story here by showing this little parachute. Also, there's a glider club here you can see. So there's gliders there, and gliders generally have the right of way over airplanes in certain situations. So just gives you a little, be cautious there. Alrighty, and you might go down the road, one other airport down the road. If we continue further off to the west there, we come to the another airport here.
Good luck on the pronunciation.
Yeah, what is that?
Looks like Schwartz.
Charette Airport. And this airport has an elevation of 4932. You can see they have no lighted runways there. The length of the longest runway is only 2,200 feet, and believe me, that's not much runway considering we're such high elevation here, and they have no Unicom there at all. However, they do have a hard surface runway. We'll talk a little bit more about that airport a little later. Okay, I'd like to have you come back to Rapid City, and one more thing I'd like to point out is just above Rapid City, there's a military airport here. Just above Rapid City, it says here, Ellsworth Air Force Base. Now, I'd like to tell you that when you come to an Air Force base, they're not marked real clearly so that you would know that you shouldn't land there. But you should never land at a military airport without some special permission ahead of time. Now you can land there in emergencies, and that's why they give you the control tower frequency, 126.2. You can get that on your radio, no problem. And it gives you the elevation of the airport, 3276. They have lighted runways, and look at the length of that runway, 13,500 feet. That's a very, very long runway. Okay. So anyway, this is an Air Force base. Now, by the way, I'll mention this to you, and that is, listen to this, class. This is important to know, especially for people flying in this area. A normal civil airport, the rotating beacon, is a green and a white, as I mentioned, to help you locate the airport at night. But a military airport has two rapid whites and then a green. It goes white, white, green, white, white, green. Right? So that'll help you locate the military airports at night. But in the daytime, you just have to do a good job of navigating and watch where you are. Be sure you don't inadvertently land at a military airport. It's probably happened in the past that someone's been coming in from the northwest here, may have been even talking to Rapid City Tower, and incorrectly landed at Ellsworth Air Force Base. And I can tell you that when that happens, they get very unhappy about that. They might, besides give you some kind of violation, they might make you remove your airplane by truck. I mean, it was illegal to land, so it's certainly illegal to take off. Yes?
Isn't it also, you seen that it's so close to the other one, shouldn't you call for their airspace?
Sure, anytime. They also have a control tower, so they have an airport traffic area. So if we were flying through their airspace, their airport traffic area, going to Rapid City, it would be a good idea to call them as we transit their area. That'd be a real good idea. If I were coming in from the northwest here, what I would probably do would be, first of all, call Rapid City. Tell them I'm inbound and tell them I'm even maybe 30 miles northwest. And then as I get a little closer, I tell them I'd like to switch over to over to Ellsworth Air Force Base, talk to them, and then once they know I'm there, they'll say, okay, you can change back to Rapid City. That'd be a good way to handle that. But that would be a good idea as you fly through their area. And of course, as long as you're more than 3,000 feet above the surface, you really don't need to call anyone there. But anyway, that's an Air Force base, and they don't mark them, they ought to mark them with a red asterisk so that you don't land there. But anyway, that's a military base. Alrighty, I'd like to talk to you about control zones now. Also on page 22, it shows a control zone here. Now, a control zone, that was that blue dashed line around the airport. Okay, the control zone, that's this blue dashed line around the airport, and it tells us right here, it shows a control zone as a blue dashed line. It's what the legend says. It says a control zone is shown as a blue dashed line. It says CZ, extends upward from the surface. All right, what does a control zone mean? Well, let me tell you what a control zone means. Let's open our books to page 22, and let's talk about a control zone. Anytime you see an airport with a control zone, here's what ought to immediately register in your brain. It's like this airport has a special star by it, a red asterisk, for instance. And that red star means that this airport has a special weather minimum. And the weather minimum for you to take off and land at this airport under visual flight rules, VFR we call it, under visual flight rules, is 1,000 foot ceiling and 3 miles of visibility. You have to have both of these. The weather has to be that good in order for you to take off and land there. You have to have 1,003. That's the rule. Now you might say, well, if that's the rule there, what is it at all other airports? At other airports, I'd like you to know this too. I want you to put this in your notes, that there's two kinds of airports. There's kinds with control zones and a kind without control zones. And I'd like you to know that one with a control zone requires a 1,000 foot ceiling and 3 miles visibility, and one without a control zone requires 1 mile visibility and clear of the clouds. Okay? So there's two kinds of weather minimums at two kinds of airports. The type with a control zone. Here's one with a control zone at Rapid City. The weather minimums there are 1,000 foot ceiling and 3 miles visibility. All other airports, here's a little airport here, here's another little airport here, Custer County Airport. These airports require only 1 mile visibility and require you to remain clear of the clouds. Oh, okay. Now, let me explain something to you. I'd like to tell you, class, that I don't want you to think that 1 mile visibility and clear of clouds is safe. I can tell you that I could legally take off at Custer County Airport here with 1 mile visibility and clear of clouds. In the Chicago area here, I could take off with, from, say, Waukegan Airport with only 1 mile visibility as long as I remain clear of the clouds. That's not safe, though. Now, I'm a professional pilot. I've been flying professionally for over 20 years. You wouldn't find me taking off from Waukegan Airport with only 1 mile visibility. I wouldn't take off from Waukegan Airport unless I had at least 3 miles visibility. Now, sometimes though, on a short flight, you just want to, maybe there's just a local lake condition at Waukegan. I know that I just drove in from the west, and I know that I can take off from Waukegan and I can head west just a short distance. It's going to be much better. I might take off with 2 miles visibility in that case. But all you have to have legally is 1 mile visibility and clear of clouds at an airport without a control zone. At the airports with control zones, we need 3 miles visibility and we need a 1,000-foot ceiling. Now you might say, why is this? Well, any airport that has regular or some kind of scheduled air taxi service, the FAA requires that that airport have a control zone to protect the traveling public. The traveling public might fly into Rapid City here, and they need some protection from light planes that might be flying around in less than 3 miles visibility. See, the FAA feels you need 3 miles to see and avoid other aircraft. So if you want to fly into Rapid City, this is an airport that might be served by an airline. That probably is served by some kind of scheduled air taxi service or airline, and the traveling public doesn't want you flying in here with only 1 mile visibility. So they require 3 miles visibility for you to take off or land at this airport. If you don't have 3 miles visibility, you basically can't go into that airport without a special rule I'll talk about in just a minute. Now down here at Custer County Airport, there is no scheduled airline of any kind. So they'll let you take off and land here with down to as little as 1 mile visibility. 1 mile visibility allows you to, just be able to operate the airplane. You can't see and avoid other airplanes because it's too little visibility. But at least they figure that there's going to be so few planes out, it's dangerous and it's risky, and me as a professional pilot would never fly with only 1 mile visibility. But it's legal to fly at an airport without a control zone with only 1 mile visibility, as long as you remain clear of the clouds. Now what do I mean when I say clear of the clouds? Sometimes people say, what is clear? How far away is clear? Well, clear of the clouds means you're just not in the clouds. Sometimes, don't get confused with the rule I'm going to tell you later about cloud separation requiring you to be 500 feet below and 1,000 feet above and 2,000 feet horizontally. That's not clear of the clouds. We call that cloud separation. But clear of the clouds means you can go right up to the edge of it, but just not in it. I had one student in my class one time, he insisted. He said, Your Airworthiness, he said, I want to know how far away is clear. I said, well, it's just not in him. He said, well, I want to know how far that is. What's that distance? And he was very insistent on knowing the distance. I finally told him, well, all right, you got to be 1.5 inches to 1 3/4 inches from the clouds. And he wrote that down, okay? So I think you get my point, all right? Clear of the clouds means just not in the clouds. Okay. Now, I'd like to tell you, at an airport with a control zone, they must have a weather observer there. And the weather observer must send their weather observations into the FAA telecommunication system. So if you see an airport with a control zone, you can get their weather, even though you might be calling Kankakee Flight Service, you can get the weather for for Rapid City, no problem. But you can't get any weather for Custer County Airport. They don't have weather service available. But if an airport has a control zone, they'll have weather service available. Now, let's talk about what this operationally means to us. Let's pretend we're taking a cross country up to Rapid City, and let's pretend that we're flying up along this airway here. Here's a Victor airway. We'll talk more about what an airway is in just a little while. But we're coming up this airway, and we're coming up near Mount Rushmore. Here's Mount Rushmore. We call Rapid City, and let's pretend, we'll take 2 examples. We'll take a day when it's completely clear. Let's pretend that it's completely clear. There's not a cloud in the sky anywhere. When you call Rapid City Tower, you'll call them and say, Rapid City Tower, this is Bonanza 8 Mike Whiskey. I'm over Mount Rushmore landing. And they might say to you, November 8 Mike Whiskey, Roger, make left traffic for runway 33. The winds are calm, altimeter 2992, report 2 miles south. They'll want you to continue up this airway, and they'll want you to report 2 miles south for left base for runway 33. This is runway 33 approximately. Now, as you continue in, as you get right about here, you might hear someone say, Rapid City Tower, this is United Airlines Flight 102, over the VOR. This is the VOR, it's a navigational radio aid. They might say to United Flight 102, Roger, plan a straight-in approach to runway 33, winds are calm, altimeter 2992, report 2 out on final, and caution there is a Bonanza inbound from the southwest. They'd say, Roger, we'll be looking for him. They would call you Bonanza 8 Mike Whiskey. You'll be number 2 now. You'll be following a United Airlines 727, and they'll say, watch out for him. And you'll say, Roger, I have him in sight. And what you'll do then is you'll widen out. Now, you were actually on a collision course for this aircraft. But because you have 3 miles visibility, you'll be able to widen out, and you'll be able to pass behind this airliner, and he'll land, and you'll follow behind him. They'll finally say, United cleared to land, and they'll tell you, finally, you're cleared to land. But the important thing to understand here is that they had 3 miles visibility or more, which allowed you to see and avoid that airplane. Even though you were on a collision course, it allowed you to avoid him. You had to have this good visibility. The visibility was a criteria that was absolutely necessary here, that they had good visibility. Now, let's take another day, a day when we have poor visibility. Say we have only 2 miles visibility and it's overcast. Now we're coming in and we call them and tell the tower we're over Rapid City Landing. They might very likely say to us, Roger, understand over Rapid City Landing. Be advised, Rapid City weather is presently 800 overcast. Visibility is 2 miles, light rain and fog. The control zone is under IFR. What are your intentions? You'd say, well, I intend to land at Rapid City. And they'd say, well, Roger, sir, be advised, the Rapid City weather is 800 overcast, visibility 2 miles. I say again, sir, the control zone is IFR. Say your intentions. You say, well, I intend to land at Rapid City. They'll say, Roger, sir, understand you're requesting a special VFR clearance. Is that affirmative? Yeah, get me one of them. That's what I want, all right? They're trying to help you a little bit here, all right? Because the weather is less than 3 miles visibility, they have a special rule. And it says that we've got to protect the traveling public. And we're not going to let a light plane in there that might collide with that airliner until we're sure that there's no airliners there, or that there's no so-called IFR, airplanes operating under instrument flight rules. You see, you're operating under visual flight rules, and other aircraft with instrument ratings, they operate under instrument flight rules. So, what I want you to understand here is that when you come into an airport with a control zone, and the weather is less than 3 miles visibility, you're going to have to get a special VFR clearance. And what they'll do is they will make sure that there are no airliners coming in here, there's no IFR planes coming in here. They'll stop all traffic and provide separation by making you stay outside the control zone until they check and make sure there are no airliners coming in, no IFRs coming in. Once those planes are on the ground, then they'll allow you into the control zone. I'll talk more about that in just a minute. We're going to take just a break for just a minute right now.